Millionaire CEO laughed at him when he said he was going to buy the Mercedes at that dealership. Before we jump in, this story reached people in over 50 countries last week. Let's see how far it goes today. Marcus Thompson's weathered hands trembled slightly as he pushed open the glass doors of Elite Mercedes Atlanta. The November wind had been bitter that morning, cutting through his faded green plaid shirt and worn black jeans like they were made of paper. His 7-year-old daughter Emma walked beside him, her small fingers interlaced with his, her bright eyes wide with wonder as they stepped into a world that seemed galaxies away from the homeless shelter they'd left that morning. "Daddy, everything sparkles," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the soft classical music playing throughout the showroom. Her tattered pink sneakers squeaked against the polished marble floor, each step echoing in the vast space filled with luxury vehicles that cost more than most people made in years. The showroom was a cathedral of automotive excellence. Gleaming Mercedes-Benz vehicles sat like precious jewels under perfectly positioned LED lighting. The walls were adorned with awards and photographs of celebrity clients. The scent of leather and new car smell filled the air, a stark contrast to the harsh reality Marcus and Emma had been living for the past 3 months since losing their small apartment. Marcus had once been a software engineer at a promising tech startup, but when the company folded overnight, taking his savings and dreams with it, everything unraveled quickly. His wife Sarah had passed away from cancer 2 years earlier, leaving him to raise Emma alone. Without her medical insurance from her teaching job, and with medical bills mounting, they'd lost everything. "Can I help you?" The voice was sharp, cutting through Emma's moment of wonder like a blade through silk. Standing before them was Victoria Sterling, the 27-year-old CEO of Elite Mercedes Atlanta. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, and her tailored charcoal grey business suit probably cost more than Marcus had made in his last month of employment. Her ice-blue eyes scanned them from head to toe with undisguised disdain. Victoria had built this dealership from the ground up after inheriting money from her grandfather's real estate empire. She prided herself on catering exclusively to Atlanta's elite, professional athletes, entertainment industry moguls, and old money families. She had a reputation for maintaining the prestige of her showroom, which meant keeping out what she considered undesirable elements. "We were just looking," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of exhaustion. Emma pressed closer to his side, sensing the tension in the air. Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against her tablet as she looked them up and down again. "Looking at what exactly? This is a luxury establishment, not a museum. Our vehicles start at $60,000. Emma tugged on Marcus's shirt, pointing toward a stunning silver Mercedes-Benz C-Class positioned near the center of the showroom. The car sat under a spotlight like a work of art, its metallic paint catching the light and throwing tiny rainbows across the wall. "Daddy, that one looks like moonlight. It's like..." For a moment, Marcus's heart swelled with pride at his daughter's poetic observation. Despite everything they'd been through, Emma still found beauty in the world. She still dreamed. But Victoria's harsh laugh shattered the moment. "Moonlight?" Victoria repeated mockingly, her voice carrying across the showroom. Other customers, a well-dressed couple examining an S-Class sedan, turned to look. "That moonlight costs $85,000, little girl. Maybe you should look at toy cars instead." The color drained from Emma's face. Marcus felt his daughter's hand tighten in his, felt her small body shrink with shame. Something deep inside him, something that had been bending under the weight of their circumstances, finally snapped. "She's 7 years old," Marcus said, his voice low but firm. "She was just making an observation about something beautiful." Victoria stepped closer, her heels clicking ominously against the marble. "Listen, I don't know how you got past security, but this isn't a place for people like you. My clients expect a certain atmosphere when they're making investments of this magnitude. Your presence here is disruptive to business." "We weren't bothering anyone," Marcus replied, his jaw clenching. "We were just looking." "Looking implies the ability to buy." Victoria shot back. "And clearly that's not the case here. I'm going to have to ask you to leave before I call security." The well-dressed couple had stopped pretending to examine their car and were now openly staring. A salesman in an expensive suit whispered something to his colleague, and they both turned to watch the drama unfold. Emma's eyes filled with tears, and she tugged harder on Marcus's shirt. "Daddy, let's go," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't like it here anymore." But Marcus knelt down to Emma's level, his hands gently cupping her face. "Emma, look at me. Do you remember what Mommy used to say about dreams?" Emma nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "She said dreams are promises we make to our future selves." "That's right," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the humiliation burning in his chest. He stood up and looked directly at the silver Mercedes, then at Victoria. "My daughter loves that car. She thinks it looks like moonlight, and you know what? She's right. It's beautiful." Victoria crossed her arms, her expression one of impatient disgust. "This is getting ridiculous. I'm calling security." But Marcus wasn't done. He turned to Emma, speaking loudly enough for everyone in the showroom to hear. "Emma, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember this car, and I want you to remember what I'm about to promise you." He pointed at the silver Mercedes C-Class. "I promise you, on your mother's memory, that someday I will walk back into this dealership and I will buy that exact car, not one like it, that one. And when I do, it will be because we never gave up, because we never stopped believing that things could get better." Emma's tears stopped, replaced by something else. Hope, maybe, or faith in her father's words. She nodded solemnly. "I believe you, Daddy." Victoria rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please. Save the Disney movie speeches for someone gullible enough to believe them. Security!" Two large men in dark suits began walking toward them from across the showroom. Marcus took Emma's hand again, his heart pounding, but his resolve strengthened by the promise he'd just made. "Come on, Princess," he said softly. "We have work to do." As they walked toward the exit, Emma turned back one more time to look at the silver Mercedes. Victoria watched them go with a satisfied smirk, already dismissing them from her mind as she turned to greet the well-dressed couple who were clearly more worthy of her attention. But as the glass doors closed behind Marcus and Emma, neither Victoria nor anyone else in that gleaming showroom could have imagined that they had just witnessed the birth of one of the most determined comebacks in Atlanta's history. The homeless man in the faded plaid shirt had just made a promise that would change everything. The security guards reached the exit just as the doors closed, but Marcus and Emma were already walking away, hand in hand, into an uncertain future that somehow felt less hopeless than it had an hour before. In Emma's mind, the silver Mercedes wasn't just a car anymore. It was a symbol of her father's love and determination. And in Marcus's mind, it had become something even more powerful, a target. If this story is hitting you in the feels, smash that like button. Tell me in the comments, what promise would you make to prove the doubters wrong? 6 months after that humiliating day at Elite Mercedes, Marcus Thompson sat in a tiny, shared office space in downtown Atlanta, his eyes burning from staring at computer code for 14 hours straight. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his makeshift workspace, a folding table wedged between a failing marketing consultancy and a woman who sold handmade jewelry online. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a step up from the homeless shelter. Emma was asleep on a small cot in the corner, covered by his old jacket. She'd learned to do her homework quietly while he worked, never complaining about the late nights or the smell of instant ramen that had become their primary food source. The 7-year-old had developed a maturity beyond her years, understanding without being told that Daddy was working on something important, something that would change their lives. "Still here, Marcus?" called Janet, the jewelry maker, as she packed up her supplies. "It's past midnight." "Almost got it," Marcus replied, not looking up from his screen. His fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision, debugging a piece of code that had been giving him trouble for weeks. For the past 6 months, Marcus had been living on a revelation that came to him 3 days after the Mercedes incident. While researching ways to improve their situation at the public library, he'd stumbled across an article about the inefficiencies in supply chain management for small businesses. Having worked in software development before his life fell apart, he recognized a massive gap in the market, a problem that millions of businesses faced but no one had effectively solved. The idea was elegantly simple. Create an AI-powered platform that could predict supply chain disruptions before they happened, automatically adjusting orders and inventory to prevent shortages and overstock situations. The technology existed, but no one had packaged it in a way that small and medium-sized businesses could afford or easily implement. Marcus had taught himself machine learning and artificial intelligence during those long nights in the shelter, using free online courses and borrowed library computers. Emma would curl up next to him with a book while he absorbed everything he could about neural networks, predictive analytics, and automation systems. She called it Daddy's magic computer learning, and somehow her innocent faith in his abilities kept him going through the darkest moments. Now, 6 months later, he was on the verge of something extraordinary. His prototype, which he'd named Chainseer, had successfully predicted supply disruptions for 3 small businesses in Atlanta with 94% accuracy. Word was spreading quietly through the business community, and he'd received calls from companies as far away as Miami and Charlotte. "Daddy?" Emma's sleepy voice came from the corner. "Did you fix the computer problem?" Marcus turned to look at his daughter, his heart clenching with love and determination. Even in sleep, she clutched a small toy car, not a Mercedes, just a generic silver sedan she'd found at a thrift store. But to Marcus, it represented everything he was fighting for. "Almost, baby girl. Go back to sleep. I'll wake you when it's time to go home." Home was now a small efficiency apartment they'd managed to rent after Marcus sold his first Chainseer license to a regional restaurant chain for $5,000. It wasn't much, but it had a real bed for Emma and a space where Marcus could work without worrying about library closing times. His phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus glanced at the screen and felt his pulse quicken. The message was from David Chen, CEO of Southern Foods Distribution, one of the largest food distributors in the Southeast. "Heard about your predictive platform from Tom Rodriguez at Prime Bistros. His efficiency is up 23% since implementing your system. Can we meet tomorrow? I have a proposition that could be mutually beneficial. David." Marcus stared at the message, hardly daring to breathe. Southern Foods was exactly the kind of major client that could transform Chainseer from a promising startup to a legitimate business. If David Chen was interested, it meant Marcus's 6 months of 18-hour days, instant ramen dinners, and coding until his eyes bled had been worth it. But more than that, it meant he was one step closer to keeping the promise he'd made to Emma. He looked over at his sleeping daughter, remembering the way her face had crumpled when Victoria Sterling mocked her innocent observation about the silver Mercedes looking like moonlight. The memory still made his blood boil, but it also fueled something deeper, an unshakable determination to prove that circumstances don't define worth. Marcus had grown up poor himself, the son of a single mother who cleaned office buildings to make ends meet. He knew what it felt like to be dismissed, overlooked, treated as invisible by people who had been born into privilege. But his mother had taught him something Victoria Sterling clearly never learned. True strength comes from how you treat people who can do nothing for you. "Tomorrow, Emma," he whispered to his sleeping daughter. "Tomorrow, we start building our future." He turned back to his computer and opened his calendar application. The meeting with David Chen would happen at 2 p.m. at Southern Foods headquarters, a gleaming office building in Buckhead that represented everything Marcus and Emma were working toward. But first, he needed to finish debugging the latest upgrade to Chainseer's core algorithm. As he dove back into the code, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Somewhere across town, Victoria Sterling was probably sleeping in her luxury penthouse, completely unaware that the homeless man she'd humiliated was about to revolutionize an entire industry. She had no idea that her cruelty had awakened something in Marcus that would have remained dormant under easier circumstances. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Emma breathed softly in her sleep, and Marcus Thompson continued typing, building the future one line of code at a time. Outside, Atlanta slept, but inside that cramped shared office, dreams were being transformed into reality through sheer force of will and the unbreakable bond between a father and daughter. In 12 hours, Marcus would walk into the headquarters of Southern Foods Distribution, wearing his best shirt. Still not much, but clean and pressed. David Chen would make him an offer that would change everything. But even more importantly, Marcus would realize that he was no longer the desperate man who had walked into elite Mercedes 6 months ago. He was becoming someone entirely new. Someone who had learned that the most powerful weapon against humiliation isn't revenge, it's success. And success, Marcus was discovering, was just another word for keeping promises to the people you love. The silver toy car gleamed softly on Emma's cot, catching the harsh fluorescent light and throwing tiny reflections across the wall. Soon, very soon, it would be replaced by something much larger and much more meaningful. But for now, it served as a reminder of the promise that drove everything Marcus did. Sometimes the most beautiful dreams are the ones that seem impossible to everyone else. The elevator to the 32nd floor of the Southern Foods headquarters building seemed to rise forever. Marcus adjusted his tie, the first one he'd owned in over a year, and tried to calm his racing heart. Emma squeezed his hand, looking unusually grown up in her best dress, a simple blue outfit they'd found at a consignment shop the day before. "Are you nervous, Daddy?" Emma asked, her voice barely audible above the elevator's soft hum. "A little," Marcus admitted, "but good nervous, like when you're about to go on a really big adventure." 18 months had passed since that devastating day at Elite Mercedes. 18 months of coding until his fingers bled, of living on hope and determination, of watching Emma grow from a heartbroken 7-year-old into a wise and resilient 9-year-old who understood that sometimes the best things come to those who refuse to give up. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area that took Marcus's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Atlanta's skyline. The floors were polished granite, the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum, and everything spoke of success on a scale Marcus was only beginning to understand. Mr. Thompson, a professional-looking woman in her 30s, approached them with a warm smile. "I'm Sarah Kim, Mr. Chen's executive assistant, and this must be Emma." Emma smiled shyly and offered a small wave. Over the past year and a half, she'd become Marcus's unofficial business partner, often accompanying him to meetings when he couldn't find babysitting. Surprisingly, her presence had become an asset. Clients were charmed by her intelligence and impressed by Marcus's dedication to being both a father and an entrepreneur. "Mr. Chen is ready for you in the conference room," Sarah continued, leading them down a hallway lined with photographs showcasing Southern Foods' 50-year history. "I have to say, he's very excited about Chainseer. Your platform prevented a major disruption for 3 of our partner restaurants last month." Marcus felt a surge of pride. Chainseer had grown from a desperate idea born in a homeless shelter into a sophisticated AI platform that was saving businesses hundreds of thousands of dollars. But more importantly, it had proved that innovation could come from anywhere, even from a man who'd lost everything. The conference room doors opened to reveal David Chen, a distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair and kind eyes. He stood immediately, extending his hand with genuine warmth. "Marcus, finally we meet in person. And Emma, I've heard so much about you. Your father tells me you're his best quality control tester." Emma giggled, some of her shyness melting away. "I just ask questions when things don't make sense. Daddy says that's the most important job." "She's right," David said, gesturing for them to sit at the polished conference table. The best innovations come from people who ask why and what if, instead of just accepting how things have always been done. For the next hour, David laid out a proposal that exceeded Marcus's wildest dreams. Southern Foods wanted to acquire Chainseer for $12 million up front, plus ongoing royalties that could reach into the tens of millions over the next 5 years. They would also offer Marcus a position as Chief Innovation Officer, allowing him to continue developing the platform while expanding its capabilities. The food distribution industry has been waiting for someone like you, David explained, sliding a contract across the table. Someone who understands both the technology and the real-world problems we face every day. Chainseer isn't just a product, it's a revolution. Marcus stared at the numbers on the contract, hardly believing what he was seeing. $12 million, more money than he'd ever imagined having, enough to secure Emma's future, to give her opportunities that had been unthinkable just 2 years ago. But more than the money, it was validation. Proof that the desperate promise he'd made in that Mercedes dealership hadn't been the fantasy of a broken man, but the beginning of an extraordinary journey. "There's one condition I need to discuss," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "I need to take care of something personal before I can fully commit to this partnership." David raised an eyebrow. "Of course. What do you need?" Marcus looked at Emma, who nodded encouragingly. She knew exactly what he was thinking. They'd talked about this moment for months, planning for the day when Daddy's promise would finally become reality. "I need to buy a car," Marcus said simply. David laughed, assuming it was a practical concern. "I think the signing bonus will more than cover a reliable vehicle. Did you have something specific in mind?" "A silver Mercedes C-Class," Emma said proudly, "the one that looks like moonlight." David's expression shifted from amusement to curiosity as he sensed there was more to this story. Marcus took a deep breath and told him about that humiliating day at Elite Mercedes, about Victoria Sterling's cruelty, about the promise he'd made to his daughter when they had nothing left to lose. "I need to go back to that dealership," Marcus concluded, "not for revenge, but to keep my word. To show Emma that promises matter, that dreams are worth fighting for, and that circumstances don't define who we are or what we can achieve." David sat back in his chair, clearly moved by the story. "You know what, Marcus? I think I'd like to witness this promise being kept. Would you mind if I came along?" Emma's eyes lit up. "Really? You want to see Daddy buy the moonlight car?" "I wouldn't miss it for the world," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's not every day you get to witness someone transform a moment of humiliation into triumph." As they left the Southern Foods building that afternoon, the signed contract safely in Marcus's briefcase, Emma skipped alongside him with more energy than she'd shown in years. The weight of financial insecurity that had pressed down on them for so long was finally lifting, replaced by something Marcus had almost forgotten existed: hope for the future. "Daddy," Emma said as they walked toward their modest apartment, "do you think the mean lady at the car place will remember us?" Marcus smiled, thinking of Victoria Sterling and her perfectly manicured dismissal of their dreams. "I don't know, baby girl, but it doesn't matter whether she remembers us or not. What matters is that we remember our promise." That evening, as Emma worked on her homework at their small kitchen table, Marcus made the call he'd been anticipating for 18 months. He dialed the number for Elite Mercedes Atlanta and asked to speak with the sales department. "Elite Mercedes, this is Brandon speaking. How can I help you?" "I'd like to schedule an appointment to purchase a vehicle," Marcus said, his voice calm and professional. "Specifically, a silver Mercedes C-Class that's currently on your showroom floor." "Certainly, sir. May I ask your name?" Marcus smiled, looking over at Emma, who was watching him with bright, expectant eyes. "Thompson," he said. "Marcus Thompson, and I'll be paying cash." Tomorrow he would walk back into that showroom. Tomorrow he would keep the promise that had sustained them through their darkest hours. But tonight, as Emma fell asleep clutching her toy car, Marcus allowed himself to feel something he hadn't experienced in years: the quiet satisfaction of a dream about to become reality. The homeless man, who had been humiliated in front of his daughter, was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more determined. Someone who understood that the most powerful response to cruelty isn't anger, but success. Someone who had learned that keeping promises to the people you love is the truest measure of character. The silver Mercedes was waiting for them, but more importantly, so was the moment when Emma would finally understand that her father's love could move mountains, or at least buy cars that looked like moonlight. 2 years to the day after Victoria Sterling had humiliated them, Marcus Thompson stood before his bedroom mirror, deliberately putting on the same faded green plaid shirt and worn black jeans he'd worn that devastating afternoon. The clothes hung differently now. He'd filled out from the gaunt homeless man he'd been. His face had color again, and his eyes held a confidence that came from proving the impossible possible. "Daddy, are you sure about wearing those old clothes?" Emma asked from the doorway. At 9 years old, she was taller, more articulate, and possessed a wisdom that still amazed Marcus daily. She understood the symbolism of this moment better than most adults would. "Very sure, Princess," Marcus replied, straightening the collar of the shirt that had once been his only decent piece of clothing. "Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is showing people exactly who you were when they decided you weren't worth their respect." Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened. "I kept my promise too." She held up the small silver toy car that had been her constant companion for 2 years. "I'm going to leave this one in the real car when we get it, like a thank you present for keeping us company while we waited." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. His daughter's capacity for gratitude and grace, even after everything they'd endured, never ceased to humble him. She had learned lessons about perseverance and dignity that many adults never master. Their current home was a 3-bedroom house in one of Atlanta's nicest neighborhoods, a far cry from the efficiency apartment and homeless shelter that had defined their previous existence. But Marcus had been careful not to let success spoil Emma or make her forget where they came from. Every night they still read together. Every morning she still made her own breakfast. The money had changed their circumstances, but not their values. "Are you nervous about seeing the mean lady again?" Emma asked as they prepared to leave. Marcus considered the question carefully. "Not nervous, exactly, but I want you to watch carefully today, Emma. Watch how we handle this situation. We're not going there to be cruel or to embarrass anyone the way we were embarrassed. We're going there to keep a promise and to show you that dreams are worth fighting for." The drive to elite Mercedes Atlanta felt surreal. Marcus drove his current car, a modest Honda that had served them well during his business's growth phase, while David Chen followed in his own vehicle. David had insisted on witnessing this moment, calling it one of the most inspiring comebacks in Atlanta business history. As they pulled into the familiar parking lot, Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions. The last time he'd walked through those glass doors, he'd been desperate, broken, clinging to hope by the thinnest thread. Now he was returning as the CEO of Chainseer Technologies, a company that had revolutionized supply chain management and was being courted by Fortune 500 companies nationwide. "There it is," Emma whispered, pointing through the showroom windows. The moonlight car. The silver Mercedes C-Class sat in almost the exact same position as it had 2 years ago, its metallic paint catching the afternoon light and casting the same ethereal reflections that had captured Emma's imagination. Marcus felt a chill of destiny, as if the universe had been holding this moment in reserve, waiting for them to grow strong enough to claim it. Victoria Sterling was visible through the windows, speaking animatedly to a well-dressed couple near a black S-Class sedan. She looked exactly the same, impeccably groomed, expensively dressed, radiating the cold confidence that came from never having her assumptions challenged. She had no idea that her life was about to intersect once again with the people she'd dismissed as beneath her notice. "Ready, Princess?" Marcus asked, taking Emma's hand. "Ready, Daddy." And they walked through the glass doors together, David Chen a respectful few steps behind. The classical music was the same, the marble floors just as polished, the atmosphere of exclusive luxury unchanged. But everything else was different, because Marcus and Emma were different. Victoria finished with her current customers and turned toward the entrance, her practiced smile faltering slightly as her eyes scanned the new arrivals. Marcus watched recognition dawn slowly in her expression. First confusion, then a flicker of memory, then something that might have been discomfort. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual authoritative edge. Something about Marcus's bearing, despite his casual clothes, commanded respect in a way that puzzled her. "I believe we spoke a couple of years ago," Marcus said calmly. "My daughter and I were admiring that silver C-Class over there." He pointed to the same car Emma had compared to Moonlight. Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers gripped her tablet more tightly as the memory crystallized. The homeless man and his daughter. The scene she'd been so proud of handling efficiently, maintaining the dealership's standards, but something was wrong with this picture. The man before her carried himself with quiet authority, and there was something in his eyes, not desperation this time, but certainty. Yes, I think I remember," Victoria said carefully. "You were browsing." Emma stepped forward, her young voice clear and confident. "You said I should look at toy cars instead of real ones. You said the Moonlight car was too expensive for people like us." A flush crept up Victoria's neck as the full context of their previous encounter came flooding back. She remembered her dismissive words, her satisfaction at maintaining the dealership's exclusive atmosphere. But why were they here now? And why did she suddenly feel like she was the one at a disadvantage? "I'm here to make good on a promise I made to my daughter that day," Marcus continued, his voice steady and professional. "I told her I'd come back and buy that exact car, the one she said looked like Moonlight." Victoria's eyes darted between Marcus and Emma, then to David Chen, who was clearly with them, and obviously successful himself. The pieces weren't fitting together in any way that made sense to her worldview. People like them, the way they had been, didn't come back. They certainly didn't come back as customers. "Sir, I'm not sure what kind of game this is," Victoria began, her voice regaining some of its edge. "But if you're here to waste my time—" "I'm here to buy a car," Marcus interrupted gently. "That car specifically, and I'll be paying cash." The showroom had grown quiet. Other customers and sales staff had begun to notice the tension in the air, the unusual dynamic playing out near the entrance. Victoria felt their attention like a spotlight, and for the first time in years, she wasn't certain she controlled the situation. "Cash?" she repeated, her voice barely concealing her skepticism. "Sir, that vehicle is priced at $87,000. Marcus reached into his jacket and withdrew a cashier's check, holding it so she could see the amount clearly. Victoria's eyes widened as she processed the numbers. $87,000, made out to elite Mercedes Atlanta, signed and certified that morning. "I believe this should cover the purchase price," Marcus said calmly. "Plus, I'd like to discuss upgrading the interior package and adding the premium sound system Emma wanted to hear that day." The check was real. Victoria's practiced eye could tell immediately, but nothing about this situation made sense. How had the desperate homeless man from 2 years ago acquired nearly $90,000? And why was he standing in her showroom, wearing the same threadbare clothes, acting like he belonged here? "Daddy," Emma said, loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "is this the part where you tell her about your company?" Victoria's blood ran cold. "Company? What company?" She looked more closely at Marcus, trying to reconcile the composed businessman before her with her memory of the broken man she'd ejected from her showroom. David Chen stepped forward with perfect timing. "Victoria Sterling, I presume? David Chen, CEO of Southern Foods Distribution. I wanted to personally witness Marcus here, keeping the promise he made to his daughter. It's not every day you meet someone who transforms a moment of adversity into this kind of success." Victoria's world tilted on its axis. David Chen was a legend in Atlanta business circles, the kind of client she'd dreamed of landing for years. And he was here, clearly supporting and celebrating the man she'd once treated like a vagrant. Marcus Thompson is the founder and CEO of Chainseer Technologies, David continued, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent showroom. His AI platform has revolutionized supply chain management across the Southeast. He's what we call a visionary. Marcus watched Victoria process this information, saw the exact moment when she realized the magnitude of her error. The homeless man she'd humiliated was now a tech CEO. The daughter she'd mocked for her innocent dreams was about to see those dreams fulfilled by a father who'd moved mountains to keep his word. Victoria began, then stopped. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she was genuinely speechless. The confident dismissal that had served her so well in maintaining her dealership's exclusivity had just been revealed as catastrophic misjudgment. "We don't need an apology," Marcus said quietly, reading the conflict in her expression. "We just need to complete a transaction. Emma has been waiting 2 years to hear what that car sounds like when you start the engine." Emma stepped closer to the silver Mercedes, her small hand touching the pristine paintwork with reverence. "It still looks like moonlight, Daddy. Even more beautiful than I remembered." Victoria Sterling had built her entire professional identity on her ability to assess people's worth at a glance, to maintain standards that protected her dealership's reputation. But standing in her own showroom, watching a 9-year-old girl finally touch the car her father had promised her, Victoria began to understand that true worth had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with character. The question now was whether she would rise to this moment or remain trapped by the prejudices that had already cost her so much more than she realized. 20 minutes later, Victoria Sterling found herself doing something she had never imagined, personally handling the paperwork for the largest single cash transaction in elite Mercedes Atlanta's history. Her hands trembled slightly as she processed the payment, not from nerves, but from the crushing realization of what her prejudice had cost her. Marcus Thompson wasn't just buying a car. He was making a statement that would ripple through Atlanta's business community for years to come. Word was already spreading through the showroom's staff and customers about the homeless man who'd returned as a tech mogul to keep a promise to his daughter. "The vehicle is ready for final inspection," announced Brad Wilson, the dealership's head of customer service, approaching their group with barely contained excitement. He'd heard the story from 3 different sources in the past 10 minutes, and the entire staff was buzzing with anticipation. Emma practically vibrated with excitement as they approached the silver Mercedes. The afternoon light, streaming through the showroom's windows, hit the car's metallic paint, creating the same ethereal effect that had captivated her 2 years ago. But now, instead of being a distant dream, it was about to become theirs. "Would you like to sit inside first, Emma?" Marcus asked gently. Emma nodded enthusiastically, and Brad opened the driver's side door with a flourish. The interior was pristine, cream-colored leather seats, polished wood trim, and the latest technology package that Marcus had added during the purchasing process. Emma slid into the driver's seat, her small hands gripping the steering wheel as she imagined all the places they would go together. "It smells like new dreams," she announced, causing several nearby observers to smile despite themselves. Victoria watched this interaction with growing discomfort. She'd built her career on the belief that she could instantly assess someone's ability to afford luxury. Her judgment had been her greatest asset, the foundation of her success. But Marcus Thompson had just revealed that foundation to be built on sand. "Miss Sterling," Marcus's voice interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "I believe you mentioned something about a premium sound system during our previous visit." Emma was curious about the audio quality. Victoria's cheeks burned as she remembered her sarcastic comment about toy cars. But Marcus's tone held no malice, no triumph, just the patient professionalism of someone conducting business. His grace in this moment somehow made her earlier cruelty seem even more inexcusable. "Of course," she managed, moving to demonstrate the sound system. As the crystal-clear audio filled the car, Emma's face lit up with pure joy. "Daddy, it's like the music is dancing around us." David Chen leaned over to Victoria as they watched Emma experience the car's features. "You know, Marcus could have chosen any dealership in Atlanta for this purchase. Porsche of Buckhead has been courting him for months, and BMW downtown offered him a significant discount, but he specifically wanted to come back here." Victoria's stomach dropped. "Why?" "Because the promise wasn't just about buying a car," David explained. "It was about proving to his daughter that perseverance matters more than initial circumstances, that dreams are worth fighting for even when, especially when, other people don't believe in them." As they completed the final paperwork, Victoria learned more about Marcus's journey. The AI platform he'd developed was being used by companies across the Southeast. His rags-to-riches story was already being written about in business journals. He'd been invited to speak at technology conferences and was being courted by venture capital firms wanting to fund his next innovation. "The irony," Marcus said quietly to Victoria as they signed the last documents, "is that the day you threw us out was actually the day everything changed. Emma asked me that night if I was sad about what happened, and I realized I wasn't. I was angry, but more than that, I was determined. Your dismissal showed me exactly what I was fighting against, not just poverty, but the assumption that circumstances define worth." Victoria felt tears threatening for the first time in years. I made a terrible mistake that day." "We all make mistakes," Marcus replied. "The question is what we learn from them." Emma had finished exploring every feature of the car and was now standing beside it, still holding her small toy Mercedes. With ceremonial solemnity, she opened the glove compartment and placed the toy car inside. "Thank you for keeping me company while we waited," she whispered to the toy. "Now you can live in your big brother car forever." The gesture was so pure, so filled with gratitude and grace, that several people in the showroom openly teared up. Even Victoria's eyes misted as she watched this 9-year-old girl teach a roomful of adults about the power of keeping faith. Marcus knelt down beside Emma, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Emma, do you remember what I promised you 2 years ago?" "You promised we'd come back and buy the Moonlight car," Emma replied. "And what did I tell you that promise meant?" Emma's voice carried clearly through the showroom. "That there's nothing in the world that courage and persistence can't achieve, and that keeping promises is the most important thing we can do." Marcus stood and shook hands with Victoria, who was struggling to maintain her composure. "Thank you for handling the sale professionally. I know this situation was unusual." Victoria wanted to say more, wanted to apologize properly, wanted to somehow undo the cruelty of their first encounter. But Marcus was already moving toward the car with Emma, ready to begin the next chapter of their story. As they prepared to leave, David Chen approached Victoria one final time. "Marcus is expanding Chainseer nationally. He's looking for corporate partners, strategic alliances. His company is projected to be worth $50 million within 2 years. Victoria's business instincts finally kicked through her emotional fog. Would he be interested in discussing a corporate vehicle program? We could offer fleet pricing, maintenance packages." David smiled sadly. 2 years ago, you had the chance to treat a potential customer with basic human dignity. Today, you had the opportunity to witness one of the most inspiring comebacks in Atlanta business history. "I think Marcus has given you enough gifts for one lifetime." As the silver Mercedes pulled out of the dealership lot, Emma waving enthusiastically from the passenger window, Victoria Sterling stood in her showroom and finally understood the true cost of her prejudices. She hadn't just lost a customer that day 2 years ago. She'd lost the chance to be part of something extraordinary. But watching Marcus Thompson keep his promise to his daughter, seeing the pure joy on Emma's face as they drove away in their Moonlight car, Victoria realized she'd witnessed something even more valuable than a business opportunity. She'd seen what real success looked like, not just the accumulation of wealth, but the transformation of love and determination into reality. The story would spread throughout Atlanta's business community within days. The homeless father who'd become a tech mogul, the daughter who'd inspired an empire, and the promise that proved dreams aren't limited by current circumstances. They're only limited by the willingness to fight for them. Victoria Sterling would never forget the lesson, and she would spend years trying to earn the right to call Marcus Thompson a friend. But that's another story for another day. 6 months after purchasing the silver Mercedes, Marcus Thompson stood at the podium of the Atlanta Convention Center, addressing an audience of 2,000 business leaders at the Southeast Technology Summit. Emma sat in the front row, wearing a beautiful blue dress and beaming with pride, as her father delivered the keynote speech that would cement his reputation as one of the region's most inspiring entrepreneurs. 2.5 years ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium, my daughter and I were homeless. We had lost everything, our home, our security, our sense of future, but we hadn't lost our dreams. The audience was rapt, hanging on every word of a story that had become legendary in Atlanta's business circles. But this was the first time Marcus had told the complete story publicly, including details that even his closest business associates hadn't heard. That day at the Mercedes dealership, Marcus continued, wasn't really about a car. It was about dignity. It was about whether circumstances define your worth, or whether your worth transcends circumstances. And it was about teaching my daughter that promises matter, especially the ones that seem impossible to keep. In the months since their triumphant return to elite Mercedes, Chainseer Technologies had exploded into national prominence. Major corporations from coast to coast were implementing Marcus's AI platform, and the company's valuation had reached $48 million. Marcus had been featured on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine, interviewed by CNN, and invited to speak at universities across the country. But success hadn't changed the fundamental truth that drove him. Emma's happiness and security remained his primary motivation. Every business decision, every expansion plan, every strategic partnership was evaluated through the lens of building a better future for his daughter. The real revelation, Marcus told his audience, came when I realized that our lowest moment, that humiliation in the dealership, had actually been a gift. It crystallized everything I needed to fight for and gave me the burning motivation to turn our pain into purpose. Emma listened with the wisdom of a 9-year-old who had experienced more adversity and triumph than most adults. She understood that her father's success wasn't just about money or recognition. It was about proving that love could overcome any obstacle. After the speech, as they walked through the convention center surrounded by admirers and potential business partners, Emma tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Daddy, do you remember what you told me the day we bought the Moonlight car?" "Which part, Princess?" "You said the car was nice, but the real treasure was learning that we could keep promises to each other no matter what." Marcus smiled, his heart swelling with pride. Emma had internalized the most important lesson. Success wasn't about what you acquired, but about who you became in the process of achieving your dreams. That evening, as they drove home in the silver Mercedes that had started their incredible journey, Emma made an announcement that surprised Marcus. "Daddy, I want to do something special for Ms. Victoria." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "The lady from the car place, what did you have in mind?" "I want to invite her to my birthday party next month. I think she feels bad about being mean to us, and Mommy always said that forgiveness is a gift you give to yourself." Marcus pulled the car over, overwhelmed by his daughter's capacity for grace. At 9 years old, Emma had learned lessons about compassion that would serve her for the rest of her life. She had seen both cruelty and kindness, experienced both desperation and abundance, and somehow emerged with a heart that chose love over resentment. "Are you sure about that, Emma? She wasn't very nice to us." "I'm sure," Emma replied, with the certainty that came from deep wisdom. Besides, our story had a happy ending. Maybe she needs to know that forgiveness can have happy endings too. 2 weeks later, Victoria Sterling received a hand-delivered invitation to Emma Thompson's 10th birthday party. The invitation was written in Emma's careful cursive and included a personal note. "I know you were having a bad day when we met. I have bad days too sometimes. But I've learned that bad days don't last forever if you keep believing in tomorrow. I hope you can come celebrate with us." Victoria stared at the invitation for 20 minutes, tears streaming down her face. The grace of this gesture, coming from a child she had treated so cruelly, was almost incomprehensible. But it was also an opportunity for redemption she didn't deserve, but desperately needed. She attended Emma's birthday party, bringing a gift that had taken her weeks to choose. A first-edition copy of The Little Prince, inscribed with an apology and a promise to never again judge someone's worth by their circumstances. At the party, surrounded by Emma's friends and Marcus's business associates, Victoria watched the Thompson family with new eyes. She saw the love that had sustained them through their darkest hours, the determination that had transformed desperation into triumph, and the grace that had turned enemies into friends. During the party, Emma approached Victoria with a piece of birthday cake and a serious expression. "Miss Victoria, do you want to see something special?" Victoria nodded, and Emma led her to the garage, where the silver Mercedes sat gleaming under the overhead lights. Emma opened the glove compartment and showed Victoria the small toy car she'd placed there months earlier. "This little car kept me company when we were waiting for Daddy's promise to come true," Emma explained. "Now it lives in the real car, so I never forget that dreams can come true if you don't give up." Victoria knelt down to Emma's level, her voice thick with emotion. "Emma, I owe you and your father an apology. I was wrong about you that day, and I'm sorry." Emma smiled with the wisdom of someone who had learned that forgiveness was more powerful than resentment. "It's okay, Miss Victoria. Everyone makes mistakes. The important thing is learning from them." As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Marcus found Victoria standing alone in his backyard, staring up at the stars. "Thank you," she said simply, "for showing me what real success looks like. It's not about the money or the status symbols. It's about keeping your word to the people you love." Marcus nodded. "Emma's wisdom, not mine. She's the one who insisted we invite you tonight." "She's remarkable," Victoria said. "You both are. We're just people who refuse to let circumstances define our future," Marcus replied. "The same choice is available to everyone." Years later, as Emma Thompson graduated valedictorian from Stanford University and prepared to launch her own tech company focused on educational equality, she would often tell the story of the silver Mercedes and the promise that changed everything. But the lesson she shared wasn't about business success or financial achievement. It was about the power of keeping faith with the people you love, the importance of treating everyone with dignity regardless of their circumstances, and the miraculous things that can happen when you refuse to let temporary setbacks become permanent defeats. The homeless father and daughter who'd been humiliated in a luxury car showroom had become a symbol of hope for anyone who'd ever been counted out, looked down upon, or told their dreams were impossible. Their story proved that the most powerful force in the universe isn't money or status or connections. It's the unbreakable bond between people who refuse to give up on each other. And somewhere in Atlanta, in a garage that housed both a silver Mercedes and the dreams it represented, a small toy car served as a daily reminder that the best promises are the ones that seem impossible to everyone else until they come true. Marcus Thompson had kept his word to his daughter, but more importantly, he had taught her that love could move mountains, that dignity was never dependent on circumstances, and that the most beautiful dreams are the ones worth waiting for. The moonlight car was just the beginning. The real treasure was the lesson that changed their lives forever. There truly is nothing in this world that courage, persistence, and love cannot achieve.